What's going on, guys? No, I'm just kidding. It's Iron Flash Gaming here, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys my top 5 competitive Pokemon in League formats. So League formats are things like the GBA and UCL, and they're definitely growing into the Pokemon community, especially the competitive Pokemon community. And I really want to explain to you how you can get better in them if you're not already involved in them. So the mons that I'm going to include on this list are mons with great move pools, typings, how many actually different play styles they can fit, and how many mons can actually check these megas. And kind of how cute they are, but that's beside the point. So we're going to head out to our number 5 mega. So I know there's a lot of mons that could easily fit into this number 5 spot, but I decided to put on Charizard X. Now, you either love him or hate him because it is weak to Stealth Rocks, and that can be very annoying, but it punishes so many different teams. Now, its Dragon Stab hits like a nuke because it does have the Tough Claws, which multiplies its attack by 1.3. So Dragon Claw and Flare Blitz gets a boost, and there are optional things to even go Outrage, but this is going to be your typical cookie cutter set. Max speed, max attack. Now, the other thing that makes this typing so scary is that Dragon hits everything for neutral damage except for things like Steel types and Fairy types. And so now you have Flare Blitz. And Flare Blitz knocks absolutely everything out of the park that can switch into Dragon Claw. And some of the most defensive checks that you're going to see to Charizard are things like Landorus's or bulky rock types. So you're going to see things like, Earthquake, Stone Edge, and depending on what kind of league you're in, there is also an option to either mega or not mega as you dragon dance. So it can create 50-50s. And once again, Stealth Rocks do punish Charizards. The next thing that you're going to see that stops this cookie cutter set are Scarf Chomps, or things that outspeed the base 100 Mons and can pretty much nuke it because you need to have some sort of check if it does set up a Dragon Dance. So how this set works is it outspeeds after Dragon Dance and it just nukes them. The last thing that checks this cookie cutter Charizard are things like the Azumarill. So it's generally bulky water types is what I'm trying to go for. Now this set, if you see something like this, like you're facing a god here, but it's more because I decided to go Azumarill with this third spot just because it is it resists its dual stabs, but it's just any bulky water that has toxic or something like that. So the other thing that Charizard can do is it can play a defensive role on teams. So if you need something defensive, you slap on a Charizard. So how this set works is you can just take everything on the special side with its investments, and then it just burns all physical attackers. So you can see how this Charizard can work versus defensive checks like Landorus's, because you burn it and you can possibly maybe live earthquakes after it's burned, or at least punish the Landorus and get residual damage on with the burns, and it can deal a massive amount of damage still with Dragon Claw and Flare Blitz or Earthquake because it is just a natural base 130 attacker. Now, the third thing that makes Charizard so good in League format is that it can go special. Its special set is not seen as much, but it's base 130. It's still very solid. And it does, it doesn't get Draco Meter, but it does get Dragon Pulse and Fire Blast. Now, the reason why I put HP Grass is the last thing that you see that checks Charizards are things like Quagsires. With the Unaware ability, it can stop the Dragon Dancing set. So if you slap on something like Hidden Power Grass, it absolutely nukes the counter to Charizard, and it still is a viable set. Coming in on our number 4 is Mega Sableye. Now this Mega is very devastating in the OU tiers because paired up with a disgustingly fat team, it becomes an unkillable mon, and that's what it just does in League format with only being weak to Fairy type, so it's a very good typing. Now, the problem with Mega Sableye is that it is one-dimensional as far as team structure. That means it only excels in a bulkier type teams or stall teams because it does not have the offensive pressure to keep momentum with offense. It loses momentum depending on the teams. So this is going to be your cookie cutter set with a Mega Sableye being Will-O-Wisp, Knock Off, Foul Play, and Recover. And so this is kind of your standard set, but the next set is just as common. But with something like this being very, very especially defensive, you can live things like Dracos from Lottie and then recover them off, and this and that. And you can just burn the physical type attackers. And if they try to set up on you, you have the Foul Play. And knockoffs just stab, get rid of their item. Now, you could throw something off like, Fake Out to ensure that you get the instant Mega, and it does get the Magic Bounce ability, but another mechanic about Mega Sableye in League format is that it has instant turn 1 Prankster. It actually has 2 abilities in one for the very first turn, so it does get Prankster right off the bat and Magic Bounce, which can be very, very difficult to deal with. But if there's a Dragon Dancing or Swords Dancing mon that's trying to set up, you do have that Prankster Willow that can, come in and burn it. So having that in the back is very good. So the next set is going to be an unkillable Mega Sableye, and this is a win condition most often. And this is once again a very, very good set by itself, which is Will-O-Wisp, Calm Mind, Recover, and I put Shadow Ball here because you're going to have Shadow Ball here more than not, because the only thing that Shadow Ball doesn't deal with are obviously normal types, but you do get the 20% chance for drops where dark typing isn't as good offensively. There's fairies and this and that can kind of switch into it. Now you can go with like a Snarl set for your special, that's kind of like the Verlicify set, or Dark Pulse, if they do have the normal type. But with this, you just burn all the physical type attackers. You have naturally like amazing defenses, and you set up a Calm Mind or 2, and the only way they can kill you is like a strong fairy types and statusing it and crits, and that's about it. So for its utility options, it does have some Ice Punch, Fire Punch, so it does get some elemental punches in there. It has Prankster. It has the Prankster turn 1, but it also has Shadow Sneak and Sucker Punch for its priority, and knockoffs just very good, and instant recovery. So it's not totally. Its move pool is pretty cool. So that 4th move slot, you can instead of having maybe like Foul Play, you can add, or instead of Fake Out, you can kind of play around with a couple of different things with Sableye. So that's what makes it good about it. But once again, it's only used on certain teams. So some of the things that can deal with a Mega Sableye are things like Clefables, fairy types in general, obviously, but especially Clefable because it does get the Magic Guard ability. You can't really burn it. That even deals with it. And even if there's the Calm Mind set, the Magic Guard set still beats the Calm Mind set, even if it does get boosts. But with this set, it has the ability to Unaware. But Clefable and other fairy types do check the Sableye. Now another thing that you're going to be threatened by is, one strong aspect about having a Mega Sableye is that it allows you to not have that good of hazards removals. You might not even have to have a Defogger or a Spinner if you have a Mega Sableye, because it does Magic Bounce the hazards away, unless they have something like a Heatran. Their hazard setters has to be able to beat a Mega Sableye in order to get up hazards, and Heatran does just that, because Mega Sableye strongly struggles against fire types. Why? Because you can't burn them, and you're actually risking it to get a Flash Fire boost. And with the secondary effects, Lava Plume, the only way you can status Sableye is Mold Breaker, Toxics, and stuff like that, and secondary effects being Lava Plumes and Magma Storm, trapping it and whittling it down. The third scary thing that you're susceptible as a Mega Sableye is something like a substitute user, and fighting types specifically, because you can't, especially if you're carrying a lot of dark type coverage, you're not going to be able to break this thing sub and you can't burn it because it subs, or he could just straight up go for a sword stance. And if you go for foul play, you're actually giving him a justified boost, and you can't. So once again, you can't foul play him, you can't burn him, and he sets up a sword stance or a sub, and it can kind of it is set up fodder versus very specific things. So those are some of the flaws with Mega Sableye, but it is still a devastating mon given the correct team structure. Holding in at our number 3 spot is Mega Latias. Now, Mega Latias is arguably shouldn't be on this list because many different formats actually do not carry this Mega. But I decided to put on here because a lot of the formats that I decided to join do have Mega Latias, and I think it's just something to consider. Now, what makes this totally broken is not the fact of what it can do. I mean, yes, it is, but it's the overlapping of the Lotties is what most people don't want to have. For example, they have regular Latias and regular Latios, and then if you include the Megas, now there's essentially 4 Lotties in the format, and that can kind of be repetitive and boring. And these leagues are often for fun. So the standard Lottie set is actually a set that just wins, and because it's natural bulk, I mean, these base stats are absolutely insane. You have a respectable base 80 HP, and for its worst stat, a base 80 HP is extremely good. Next, we have base 150 special defense and base 120 defense. You know, that means that you can take super effective hits, you can take ice punches and things like that, and just recover off. And with its base 110 speed, you outspeed everything. And base and the you know, the shocker of this all is the base 140. Once you set up one Calm Mind, it is very hard to switch into, and you can't kill it. What hinders this mod is actually its typing. Now, the dragon typing, a mono dragon typing, is actually pretty good, but paired up with dragon and psychic, you have a lot of overlapping weaknesses. Another thing is that it's very hard to decide what coverage you want to have. So when you have a Mega Lottie, you carry the substitute to avoid 2 different things. The first thing that you avoid with sub is status, and that's the most important thing, but also you set up substitutes so you are not susceptible of getting crit. For example, if you set up a Calm Mind versus something, then you set up a sub, and if you get crit, and if you're not behind a sub, that can be GG. This thing can die if it gets crit or this or that. But if you have the sub and they do get a crit, one every ever so often moves, you can afford to get crit essentially. And so with this move, you can run things like maybe Psyshock, Psychic, or Psyshock, Dragon Pulse, or even something neutral that hits their whole team. Another set is not really the best set for this Lottie, because regular Latias and regular Latios do this better. But if this does fall in a draft, it can be a decent defogger if you need it to fill that role. It is, once again, not its best role to do, but it does have that option, and it is nice to have it. This is a typical Lottie set. You can throw HP Fire on there for Ferrothorns and Scissors and things like that. But generally with Lottie, it has so many options as well, with its Ice Beam, Shadow Ball for the Metagrosses, just so many different things you could do. Thunder Wave, Toxic. So it could do a lot of scary things, but generally you want to be running a setup sweeper set. But if you decide not to, I mean, its coverage, it does have a couple other interesting things. For example, Reflect type. Now, one of the biggest weaknesses with psychic types is that they're prone to be pursuit traps. For example, if they have a Tyranitar or a Weavile or a strong dark type, Lottie doesn't really want to be taking those from something like a Banded T-Tar, for example. What it can do is actually Reflect type on something like T-Tar if it's not Scarfed, I mean, generally, like this thing has such naturally good defenses that it actually can take a crunch or a pursuit. It gets up the reflect type, and now it can recover off on the T-Tear, and then maybe switch out and this and that. So it is a very, very good item. And then having a Healing Wish user is always good in league format, you know, just to get back your win condition. But so often, once again, it is the win condition. But it can be just as good as a supporting mon, being able to defog and Healing Wish and Thunder Wave and so many different coverage moves it can run. So some of the checks are, you can't even really run Scarf Tyranitar against the Latias because it is so bulky. And if you do decide to go that route and you decide to lock yourself in pursuit and they stay in, you're going to have to sack them on and then come back into Tyranitar. I just think, you know, bans eliminates kind of 50-50s, and you know, there's I mean, you could take a hit. I mean, even hidden power fightings it could decently check because it's a Tyranitar. So I mean, that's the other thing with Lottie, is that it's going to be, you know, Calm Mind, recover, you know, psychic or whatever, and then, you know, substitute is somewhat optional because it does have the ability to prevent status and this and that. But if, you know, if they have a fairy type and a Tyranitar, then, you know, you're kind of put in a position to put, you know, Psy Shock and HB fighting or something along those lines. Next is somewhat unaware users can, you know, obviously deal with setup users. Because if you get a status like a Toxic up on the Lottie, that greatly limits it. But the other thing with Clefable is it's a fairy typing, and fairy typings in general can kind of deal with the Lotties. It depends, because something like Grand Bull, you know, the lower tier fairies cannot stand a chance versus the Lotties. But you need, not only do you need a fairy, you need a very good reliable fairy that has somewhat offensive presence, because if it doesn't, like, if Florges is your Lottie check and Florges doesn't have Calm Mind, it cannot beat the Lottie. It is insanely bulky and offensive, and it just does so much. Last but not least is a Scavalier. Even if Lottie does pack HP Fire, it still isn't going to do enough to an AV a Scavalier and like Mega Horn, nukes it, and then it has the percent to, you know, if you try to switch out, then it pursues. And so there are options to deal with Mega Lotties. So if you decide to go the Mega Lottie route, or even draft a Lottie to begin with, these are a couple mons you want to have checks for. But other than that, I mean, Mega Lottie, even with Tyranitar, Clefable, and Scavalier, Lottie still puts in the work. So that is why it's in the number 3 spot. Now, with our number 2 spot, we have Mega Gardevoir, and this is definitely controversial because it's not seen as much as the first round picks, but it definitely is a first round pick every single time. The reason why is Mega Gardevoir hits harder than pretty much any other Mega in the format, bar things like a Mega Metachan. Base 165 special attack is insane, paired with the ability Pixelate is too much to handle. The other thing that makes it really cool is before it megas, it has Synchronize, which you're not really going to use, but Trace. And Trace is, if you play Trace well, it can do very, very well. For example, you can switch into a Volcanion Steam Eruption. You can switch into a Jolteon's Volt Switch because you get Water Absorb, you get, you know, Volt Absorb, and in certain matchups you can do a couple of very good things. I mean, even Manectric, if you switch this thing into a Manectric and get its Lightning Rod ability, I mean that can be good game right there. But the other thing that makes it just so incredible is there's not really anything in the game that can deal with Gardevoir defensively. There's just not. Its move pool is always going to carry Hyper Voice. At least it should. Now, Psychic, you know, having Psychic or Psy Shock really helps it as well, because there's only 2 things that can switch into Fairy typings. That's Poison type and Steel types. And though Psy Shock does not hit the Steel types, it does hit the Poison types. So things like Weezing, things like Gengar. I mean, Gengar's not Hyper Voice switching to begin with, but you get the point. Next is Focus Blast. That does hit Steel types. It doesn't hit all Steel types like Scizors and stuff like that. So you can rock the Hidden Power Fire, but There's things like Skarmory. There's things like Metagross that, for Skarmory, it has Thunderbolt. For Empoleon, it has Thunderbolt. For things like the Metagrosses and even Jirachis, you have things like Shadow Ball. Um, there's no defensive switch-ins, and this thing just blows back teams. The only things that you can deal with it is having very, very, especially defensive AV users or mons that can somewhat revenge it with over the base 100 speed. But you can definitely work around these things with these other few sets. And I mean, there's more than just 4 sets, but that is the beautiful thing about Mega Gardevoir. Next, we have a just more coverage that I can do. So once again, we're always going to be carrying Hyper Voice on Gardevoir because that's what makes it just so incredibly strong. But it has option to Calm Mind. That means you can even run something like a sub, or I mean, so many different options. So for example, if you were to run, Hyper Voice and Calm Mind, and you burn the physical attackers, you're still not going to be taking physical attacks that well unless you invest in like defense or something insane like that. But just Willow is really good option. Now Calm Mind and Substitute, it has a base 135 special attack. That is unbelievably good for something that hits so hard. And it only needs to get up 1 Calm Mind, because not even Chansey and Blissey can deal with this, because it has, as we saw earlier, it has Taunt. It could have our next set, which is a Wish Protect, Hyper Voice Taunt. Eventually you will beat the Fat Blobs with something like this. I mean, you don't have to run Protect. You can run something like maybe a Psyshock or whatever. Depends on the team matchup, but like Mega Gardevoir can just do so many things. And the last thing that can really make this thing into a devastating mon is the Trick Room option. Now, Trick Room's not something you're going to be running every single week, but it is very nice to have that trap card. And this is something that you see a lot in VGC of last year. I mean, not really this year because there's nothing but like Ubers and stuff like that, but just the Trick Room option can win games, as we saw with Mr. Arcaniners of the GBA in TTM March Madness. Mega Gardevoir ended up having Trick Room and did very, very good things with it. So some of the things that can somewhat slow Mega Gardevoir down, in theory, nothing does, but if you're going to deal with it, technically Tornadus should be on this list too, but it's like Hyper Voice still does a ton, Psyshock still does a ton. So if you have a Tornadus with the Iron Tail or something like that, you can somewhat deal with it, but it is a pest. But things that can kind of switch into it are something like soundproof users. So Mr. Mime is kind of a interesting mon that hasn't been seen in formats, but it has its place, to be honest. So if you type in soundproof, you can see a couple different lists of mons. So something like an Abomasnow. Yeah, I mean, that's really, I guess you can draft Bouffalant, but with the soundproof ability, you're not affected by the Hyper Voice, and it forces the Gardevoir to have other options. So once again, the scary thing with Gardevoir is if it has the correct coverage, the soundproof ability is useless. So for example, if they have an X-Cloud and they carry Focus Blast, there's no point of even having soundproof unless you dodge the Focus Blasts. I guess the only thing that defensively can switch into Gardevoir is Jirachi, but once again, it does have a Will-O-Wisp. Yeah, Will-O-Wisp. So if you burn Rachi, like, it's over. But like defensively, if it has like 4 attacks or whatever, and Shadow Ball just isn't going to be doing enough to something like Jirachi because it does have the base 100s, which is really, really, really insanely bulky. And then it can obviously kill it with Iron Head back and Wish Protect. But Wish Protect is not that good recovery. So I mean, even if they do have something like a Jirachi, you still can work around it. And because of all these factors, it definitely makes a good balance mon. Alright guys, we have our number one, the cotton ball itself, Mega Altaria. Now, if Mega Metagross was included in this list, it would definitely be number one over Altaria, but it's not seen in most leagues because Mega Metagross is too broken. Or if there's any other Mega that's in Ubers, I'm not including those as well. These are league format mons, and Mega Altaria is, in my opinion, the best Mega. And the reason why is let's just start off all the things that I can do. For example, typing. Typing is what I think makes it just an absolutely devastating mod to deal with. For example, if your team is weak to fire, if it's weak to dragon, if it's weak to bug, if it's weak to this, to that, it just Mega Altaria has so many resistances. I mean, you pair it up with something like a Manaphy that only has two weaknesses, being grass and electric. You pair that with Altaria, and those two mons are just you can't kill them, and they just sweep your team. So this is going to be your cookie cutter set for Mega Altaria. This is the best set by far, which it just easily sweeps teams, which is Return, as it does get the Pixelate ability, Earthquake to hit Steel types, Dragon Dance, and Roost. What makes this very cool set is, I mean, you can run something like Facade if they are going to have something like a Rotom or something like that, and you want to get it burned. Like, it does have that option, or even something like a Double Edge. So if you really want to get a 2-hit KO on something, Double Edge is your way to go. Now you can run so many other physical type attacks pairing with it. It has a very, very good move pool, but it has kind of like a 4-move slot syndrome because it can do so many different things. The thing with Mega Altaria, it can fit on balanced teams the best, but it can go on stall teams to an extent, bulky offensive teams to an extent. It doesn't necessarily fit on like hyper offense because it just doesn't have the natural speed on there, and it's instant power without a boost isn't completely utterly, it's not a Mega Gardevoir or Mega Charizard that instantly right off the bat they hit like nukes. This thing still hits very, very hard naturally though. um, the other thing that you see with Mega Altaria is its special set, which something you can play around with depending on your matchup. So if they have a fairy check, you can beat whatever fairy checks on their team. So you have, Hyper Voice, Flamethrower, Heal Bell, and Roost. So, pretty standard here. Hyper Voice is boosted by a Pixelate ability, Flamethrower to hit the Steel types. And I mean, if they do have something like a Heat Ray and Ferrothorn core, I mean, you could go Hyper Voice, Flamethrower, Earthquake, Roost. I mean, you could have like so many different coverage options with this thing. I mean, you can even go Ice Beam if you want to hit something like a Crobat or whatever. Like it can do so many different things. Another set that isn't seen too often, but you have to prepare for, or else it just becomes an unkillable mon, is the Cotton Guard set. And if they have something like a bullet punch user in the back, or something to deal with a Mega Altaria, just having a Cotton Guard can beat Steel types by itself, or beat Poison types if you're able to get the Cotton Guard off, because it boosts 3 stats in defense. With its typing, you're not going to be able to kill it, but I think some of the things that make Mega Altaria the thing that it does is it has Dragon Stab options. You're not going to be seeing Dragon Stab in standard OU. And in League format, if they have a Venusaur, well, it gets Draco Meteored into a KO'd. You can't, and even if they want to go especially defensive to somewhat see the Draco Meteors coming your way, you can run Outrage and go physical. You cannot switch into Altaria simply because of its coverage. The reason why we have HP Rock here is Talonflames and even Moltres do deal with its dual, or it deals with its Fairy Stab, and then Earthquakes or Flamethrowers. But because it does have, I mean, even Dracos are not appreciated by Talonflame unless it's like especially defensive, and then you just nuke them with Hidden Power Rock, and just, I mean, so many devastating options that Mega Altaria has, paired with a Heal Bell Cleric support here. Um, the reason why you would ever run Agility is if you have a special set, you set up an Agility late game, and that's the game. So I think the really only somewhat checks here are, I guess, Cofagrigus. Now, Cofagrigus definitely does check Mega Altaria because once it touches it with Mummy, it just goes bye-bye here. But you just switch out and then you come back and then you kill it and then you switch out and then... So it does at least slow it down, but it's still not appreciating. I mean, something like a Double Edge, Adamant Double Edge, probably still gets to it KO'd. Venusaur, like we said, we had Dragon coverage to hit Venusaur, so is it really a check? The only thing that you can deal with something like a Mega Altaria is you just have to have an overwhelming amount of checks for Altaria, and if you have a mon like that, you're going to be able to win the game. So if you guys have any suggestions on what your favorite Megas are in the formats, or something that can even add more to this video, let me know in the comment section below. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave this video a like, and I'll be coming at you guys with more team building videos and so much more. So till next time, peace.